We've ranked Metallica, we've ranked Slayer, but now it's finally time to rank Megadeth.
When you least expect your fate, I attack.
Alright y'all, and as always, this is just my opinion, my personal taste, and we are only doing maximum 4 per tier to keep this interesting. But let's start right off with Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good in 1985. Now this album goes super hard and definitely does what it was meant to in rivaling Metallica's early work in heaviness and speed after a not so amicable split. It also has this extra sense of attitude and rebelliousness that is pretty infectious. Fun fact, there may still be some unheard lost demo versions of some of these songs as per an old Whiplash article that I talked about in my Lost Media video. Great way to open the album on a high note with serious riffage, and he keeps it going. Honestly, it's hard to pick favorites on this one because they're almost all fantastic. It is a little imperfect in the second half with Mechanics, These Boots, and Looking Down the Cross in particular falling a bit below the others for me. But even so, it's one of the best thrash metal albums out there, and I'll just say it, it's better than Kill 'Em All.
You need to leave.
I'm gonna put this one at A tier. Then we got the classic Peace Sells But Who's Buying in 1986. This album is also a bit slower at times and going for more dynamic and somewhat progressive arrangements like Wake Up, and the results are kind of mixed. There are songs I absolutely love on here, like the title track, which is just so much fun to scream along to, and that bass hook is one of the greatest of all time. But then there's a lot of other stuff on this album that causes me to check out. Also, one of the things I like a lot about the debut is that Dave kind of recognizes his vocal shortcomings and doesn't try to overdo it, but here you already get some of his more annoying sounding moments. There's nothing I would call outright bad, and it's still better than a lot of the later material, but it's not an album I enjoy much start to finish, so I do think it's a little bit overrated, which I mentioned in one of my other videos. That said, I still think for a Megadeth album, and again, when I rank these, it's pretty much exclusively within their own discography, not in the greater course of music, but for them, I'm gonna put it at A tier. Following that up with So Far, So Good, So What, 1988. Now, of the earlier albums, I feel like this is the one that comes up the least in conversation. You can definitely hear Dave really trying to up the production value with the intro to this one, big ripping guitar solo with plenty of atmospheric elements. Pretty epic and smartly puts the riffs front and center since that's always been the draw with this band, but on the other hand, it takes a while before we really get into the album. Like, it makes me think of my old videos with the insufferably long intros. And similar to the previous album, this one feels a bit bloated in places with songs often feeling longer than they need to be. Lots of great moments, but not many truly fantastic songs, I would say. And I find the Sex Pistols cover to be pretty insufferable, honestly. So frankly, I find it kind of boring, even if I respect the technicality of it, and nothing really overall sticks with me though. So I'm putting this one at C tier. As always, let me know down in the comments where you disagree, and let's have a fun conversation about that. Oh, but then we follow that up with Rust in Peace in 1990. Now, it's almost cliche at this point to say that this is one of, if not the best album in the catalog, one of the best thrash metal albums of all time, but people continue to say that for a reason. It was even nominated for a Grammy for what it's worth. This is like the perfect balance of all that impressive musicianship and progressive songwriting now contained within more memorable songwriting, and it just all comes together here. I had a lot of people complaining that I was saying that some of the newer songs are longer than they need to be, but it's not just pure length, it's what you do with it. And I think some of those songs, they just sort of repeat the same thing over and over again and drag the runtime into like 5 and 6 minutes where they don't need to. Here, these long songs, Dave is capitalizing on every second of it. There's always something new and interesting around each corner. You've got so many classics here to pick from: Holy Wars, Hangar 18, Take No Prisoners, but then the deeper cuts are just as strong. I love the bass again on Poison Was the Cure. Definitely my go-to in their discography and one of the best to put on start to finish. Easy S tier album for me. Then we got Countdown to Extinction in 1992, kind of changing the pace a little bit. Production and composition both feel like a significant step back, I would say, from the last one, even having more of a simplistic rock and roll vibe. In a way, it's kind of like their Black Album. Like, a lot of these bands just could not escape that 90s wave that sort of shifted all their sounds, at least temporarily. Now, I want to be clear because someone got mad at my Entombed tier list saying I just don't like the less metal albums from that band, and I want people to understand I'm a big fan of 90s rock, grunge, alternative. That's what I came up on. Like, I love that shit. But it has to be done well, and there's just not many songs here that can stack up against my favorites in the likes of Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Smashing Pumpkins, etc. Symphony of Destruction is kind of fun, even though now it feels like Dave who is ripping off Metallica with that riff. The swing of Sweating Bullets is also kind of entertaining, if not a little silly at times. It's also a needlessly long album. My favorite long albums, again, tend to be more complex and proggy, and so for this one to be where they really stretch things out with these more basic songs is just sort of perplexing to me. Although within the context of the times and the increased space on CDs, maybe that had something to do with it. Once more, not terrible, but not particularly exciting to me either. Another one I've listed as some of my most overrated albums. I'm putting this one at C tier.
How dare you!
That followed up by Youthanasia in 1994. This is kind of like the last album, but worse in my opinion. It's not without its moments, like the funky head bob of Train of Consequences, but it's just not enough to justify its full existence when stacked up against the competition at the time in this genre.
I'm doing you a favor as I'm taking all your money.
At best, it's passable, and at worst, it's corny. Not much else to say about this one. At least it has some riffs that kind of call back to the older stuff, like The Killing Road. I know some people seem to really like this one too, but personally for me, it's a D. Again, let me know down in the comments why you disagree. But then they follow that up with the somewhat underrated, I would say, Cryptic Writings in 1997. This is the last album with drummer Nick Mensa, which ended the longest lasting lineup of the band to date, continuing to go for more mainstream appeal, and like it or not, it definitely worked, because this one debuted at number 10 on Billboard 200. It's certified platinum. Trust was nominated for a Grammy. So respect to Dave and the band, since that is not something just anyone can accomplish, especially as a band crossing over, and I will contend that the compositions are stronger here, and it's better than any of this era's Metallica albums, personally, in my opinion.
I am shocked! Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
I'm still not as into it as some of the classics, and I see that critics at the times were also pretty divided, but I think there's more to enjoy here. I do like Almost Honest, but I'm kind of oddly partial to the remix from the Mortal Kombat Annihilation soundtrack, oddly enough, since that was my introduction as a kid. Definitely makes me smirk throwing that out as a reference point of what the state of pop culture and popular music was at that time. I also enjoy the strings on Use the Man, and Mastermind and Disintegrators are actually kind of a low-key banger for those riffs. Frankly, even though the highs are not as high, I think it's more consistently enjoyable than Peace Sells, and that might be a really spicy hot take. Like, start to finish, I mean. I just think as a whole album, I do think it's actually a little bit stronger, even though overall, I like the best songs on Peace Sells better, so I'm going to put it at B tier. Then we have the controversial Risk in 1999. Now, apparently the name of this album stems from Lars Ulrich at some point telling Dave that he should take more risks with his music, and this album is definitely an encapsulation of that mission statement, if nothing else. It's not avant-garde or anything, but there is definitely some experimentation going on here. You have the electronic elements on Insomnia, which I can imagine got mixed reactions from the longtime listeners, but I kind of like them. I guess one reviewer from Entertainment Weekly even compared this to Nine Inch Nails. Crush 'Em is kind of fun, and Mustaine at one point even said he felt that Wanderlust is one of the best songs he's ever written, which I don't agree with, but it's not that far off of tracks that people love from, like, Bon Jovi. This was the lowest Metascore rated album on Metal Storm, and I've heard it trashed more than a few times, but honestly, I don't hate it. At least it's kind of interesting, which is more than I can say about some of the other albums we've already talked about. And again, I think it's better overall than most 90s Metallica albums.
Let the hate flow through you.
Yes, it was a commercial and critical failure, but it's overhated if you ask me. I'm still not putting it that high. I'm putting it at C tier, but yeah. overhated. Next up, The World Needs a Hero in 2001. So this was marketed as an antidote to Risk, but like I just said, I think the result is that it falls back into bland and forgettable territory. It's definitely heavier in places, but that alone doesn't make for a better album if the songwriting just isn't there, and I don't think it is. Like, I would much rather actually listen to Risk than this Snorefest. It's far from terrible again, but I will remember nothing of this album, and in many ways I find it to be the worst crime an album can commit, is just not leaving anything to linger with you. I do think it's at least a little bit better than Youthanasia, but I'm still putting it at D tier. The System Has Failed, 2004. So notably, the first album Mustaine recorded after recovering from his arm surgery that prevented him from playing, and also the first without Dave Ellefson. Dave did state that he found the writing on this one liberating since he had full control over everything like on the early albums, and it was actually supposed to be a solo album, but then was later rebranded as a Megadeth record, at least partially due to contractual obligations. Definitely working more on a return to form here, and it did hit 18 on Billboard. This actually feels much more like the album I would have expected after Rust in Peace. It's not nearly as strong, but I find myself much more consistently grooving to it. Tears in a Vial makes for a pretty relatable kind of breakup song too. I feel pretty good giving this one a B tier. United Abominations, 2007. So continuing the march back into thrash, this album made number 8 on Billboard. So good to hear the real riffage coming back to the forefront, since this is the best thing that this band has to offer on tracks like Sleepwalker. Christina Scabbia of Lacuna Coil also performs on Atau Le Monde or Set Me Free, which makes for some interesting new dynamics. Still definitely not top shelf, as there are plenty of moments I don't really care for, like United Abominations and Gears of War, Blessed Be the Dead, and then Americistan feels like it's from the mind of an angsty 16-year-old who just thinks he's so clever. There's a reason why Megadeth also made my cringiest bands list, even if they were on the lower end. I'm putting this one at C tier. But then we got Endgame in 2009, and here's an album where things get really good again. Like, Mustaine actually used old rehearsal tapes for inspiration, and the results really show. Chris Broderick of Nevermore and Jag Panzer stepping in on guitar seems to help as well. The solos on this album are some of the best of the band's career, and luckily they are also backed by more great songs and excellent production. Very positively reviewed, and it even won the Metal Storm Awards vote for the best thrash album and biggest surprise of 2009. There are still some in the second half I don't like as much, but still really good. Always nice to see a band drop one of their best albums late in their career. This one's going all the way up to A tier. Then we got the simply titled 13 in 2011, and Dave said this was kind of a mix of songs he had written earlier in his career, including Sudden Death, New World Order, Black Swan, and Millennium of the Blind, and also new compositions, but then compared it to like Sabbath and Queens of the Stone Age. Unfortunately, I'd say this is another case of 2 steps forward, kind of 10 steps back. The lyrics on this album, especially tracks like We the People, are laughably embarrassing, which is something I could maybe forgive if the music was great, but it's just not.
Public enemy number 1. A stolen card, I'm on the run.
The instrumentation is actually quite good in places, but not enough to make up for the shortcomings, so I'm putting this one all the way back down at D tier. Rocky ride this discography can be. Speaking of which, time to talk about Super Collider in 2013. So if there is another album as maligned in this discography as Risk, it's Super Collider. In fact, I see this one make a lot of worst albums of all time lists. Most critics did not like it, although most seem to agree that Kingmaker was a highlight, which is understandable because it's a fun song overall, but even that one is still a little bit on the corny side. I definitely hear Dave again stripping things back and trading complexity and ferocity in favor for more straightforward rock tropes, except this time in much more painful ways.
Till the world explodes. Just like a super collider. Like a super collider.
The title track is some of the most butt rock boomer shit I've ever heard, like a third-rate Guns N' Roses. I'll give Burn that it has that shredding opener, but then immediately it loses momentum. I think it's mainly that 1-2 punch of the more southern fried guitars with Dave trying to actually sing that makes for total cringe. Worst album of all time? No, but definitely deserving of the bottom of this list. Yes, I think Risk is way better than this. This is going to F tier. Then Dystopia in 2016. More endless lineup changes with Angra's Kiko Luero coming in on guitar and my man Chris Adler of Lamb of God stepping in on the kit. And I gotta say, I miss him in Lamb of God. They are just not the same without him. More accolades here with a number 3 on Billboard and their first Grammy win.
That no one lies, someone is Dystopia.
Fear Factory guitar tone on that opener got me feeling some particular ways. Death from Within has some weird, like, Avenged Sevenfold vibes, which is kind of full circle since they have clear Megadeth influences on their music. Bullet to the Brain is kind of annoying, reminds me a lot of later career Mudvayne at times, although the solos are really excellent. Poisonous Shadows is easily one of the most epic things that the band has ever crafted, with those massive riffs and almost a symphonic approach. This is what I meant again when I say you can sometimes overcome cheesy lyrics with a great composition. Conquer or Die is another standout with its spectacular neoclassical build-up and church bells, great dynamics and diversity. Overall, really strong album. Maybe not quite A, but like a B+. So there it goes. And that brings us to The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead in 2022.
No, you screaming for mercy, no, you're making a sound. Do you step right up and get smacked back down?
So considering how up and down the later discography has been, I went into this with relatively low expectations, but that definitely changed with the release of We'll Be Back. This track brought back a lot of the same pure thrash metal energy as their early work, quickly getting me banging my head and singing along with the chorus, not to mention the little touch of church bells and kicking off several fantastic solos of many more to come here. This momentum continued with Night Stalkers, which is another banger overall with that incredible guitar hook, although at nearly 7 minutes it doesn't do nearly as much with the runtime as classics like Holy Wars, and the Ice-T feature feels kind of corny and tacked on. Still enjoyable though, cut this thing down to like 3.5 to 4 minutes and it could be one of their best.
They seize the night when it's dark like inside a tomb.
Side note, is it just me, or is the cover a bit of a throwback to So Far, So Good, So What? Regardless, I'd say songs like the title track, Life in Hell, the ripping, heavy metal-infused Celebutante, and Soldier On are at least on par with material from Endgame and Dystopia. Admittedly, Dave sounds a little bit tired in places, but it's still nice to hear the band sticking to mostly those raging palm mutes and foot-tapping beats that always get my motor running. Love those picking parts on that latter track, too. Nice to find a few surprises here as well, like that lovely atmospheric opening to Dogs of Chernobyl with the layered acoustic guitars making a return again on Killing Time. But on the flip side, I'm not a huge fan of Sacrifice or Mission to Mars, which is pretty corny, and the intro to Junkie honestly made me giggle a little bit, which is not what you want for such a serious topic that Dave is more than familiar with. Pretty catchy otherwise. So while not perfect by any means, as a whole, I'd say this album is pretty damn strong. There's nothing that absolutely loses me. The high points are very high, and I'm consistently enjoying the guitar work pretty much all the way through. Really, what more could you ask for from a classic thrash metal album in 2022? Again, trim this thing down to a leaner 45 or so minutes, and I think it would be even stronger, but I still feel good about giving this one a pretty high position at B tier. Y'all check out this playlist for more metal tier lists, including Metallica and Slayer, and let me know down in the comments, how would you rank these albums differently? Let's have a conversation. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.